Okay, good. We had a class on Tuesday night on one of my favorite programs. I hope it's one of yours as well. The subject of environmental ethics in Jewish tradition. I think it's a very important topic and one that needs to be emphasized, especially just like last week was the Parsha dealing with justice. This week's portion deals to a large extent with environmental ethics. At least a good part of it does. When I was growing up in the 1960s, that was the time people started talking about the issues pertaining to pollution and overpopulation. You know, it's funny, we don't hear very much about overpopulation right now, but that's still a very serious problem. And of course, it was customary back then in places like UC Berkeley, where I grew up, to blame the Bible for much of the problems concerning pollution. And a number of years ago back then, a Protestant clergyman met at the School of Theology in Claremont, the school that I hope to someday teach in a not too distant future, concluded that the biblical story of Genesis is responsible for the exploitation, quote, of the environment by science and technology, and this is, of course, contributed towards air and water pollution, overpopulation, and many other serious ecological threats. Professor Lynn White of UCLA was the head of this convention, and together with D.Z. Suzuki, Joseph Campbell, and many others, they hammered away at the idea that the Oriental Greco world venerated nature and worshiped nature, unlike the Bible, which does not worship nature. It exploits nature and therefore is responsible for all the problems. René Dubos, one of my favorite heroes of that era, wrote a book on a God within. And he sets the record straight. You know, one of the things which I find utterly amazing at times is how people who've never read the Bible can blame the Bible for everything wrong that exists in our world today regarding the environment. Yes, does the Bible talk about dominion? Mm-hmm. The question is, what does the Bible mean by dominion? The word rodeh in Hebrew, according to Rashi, has a very different meaning than the ones that you hear from the Claremont University. According to Rashi, human beings can either be the best of creation, or if they fail to act wisely, they can be the lowest entity in creation itself. So the word raid, which implies supremacy, also implies inferiority. And it's up to us to decide what kind of creatures we're going to be in God's good earth. Are we going to destroy the world through nuclear warfare, pollution, and other things? Or are we going to prove that we are good stewards of the earth? And when I think about this, I wonder, why do so many professors have an animus towards the Bible? I think it's a fair question to ask. Well, I think there's a fundamental difference between the way liberalism looks at human rights versus the way the Bible looks at human rights. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that their liberty endows them with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, why would anyone object to that? I know. It says men are equal. Well, actually, when they said men back then, they meant everybody. It didn't matter what race you were. Does that mean there weren't problems back then? Yes, there were. But the fundamental idea is that God gives us the rights for the realization of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Liberal Western professors would like to believe that it's not God that gives us these rights. It is the state that gives us these rights. Is human life sacred according to the state?
No.
Not necessarily. In places like Canada, for example, they're giving people who are sick, who cannot take care of themselves because of economic problems, the option of committing suicide. And the government will pay for it. These kind of programs already exist in Europe. But is human life less sacred because someone is sick, because someone can't afford to pay a doctor? Are we going to say that human life is no different than any other life form? No, that's wrong. But in many ways, when you take a look at it, the state does have God-like power. The state has the power to send our children to fight wars. Wars that may not necessarily be to the best interest of our own country. We've seen this in Vietnam. We've seen this in Afghanistan. We've seen this in Iraq. So the power of the state is like the power of God in many ways. Our Torah says that the state is beholden to a higher authority, as they used to say in the Hebrew national hot dog commercials. Kind of like that. So what does the Torah tell us about stewardship? God made Adam to take care of the world. That's what it says in Genesis 2:8. We're not here to exploit the world. And in this week's Torah portion, we learned something else. That animals have moral agency. What does this mean? This means that your cat, or your dog, or your horse, in many ways has the personality of a person. When our cats look at us, what do they say? Feed me, and I will love you. Clean my litter box, and I will adore you. And I mentioned last week that if there is a 614th commandment, it is to love your cat and dog as yourself. So what does this mean? If animals have names, does that mean that we have to recognize their individuality? Doesn't that mean we can't just abuse them or mistreat them? Doesn't that mean that we have responsibilities to look after our animals? Now, Paul in the New Testament says, do you think God cares whether or not you muzzle an ox? What does our Torah say? Don't muzzle an ox. What's the reason for that? Who's doing all the work? The ox. Should the ox deserve to receive some payment for his hard trouble? Rabbi Hertz in the Hertz Pentateuch says that in Italy, the vineyards of the finest wines in the world, the Italian landlords used to muzzle their workers so they wouldn't eat any of the grapes. So what do we see from this? If we exploit animals, we're not far from exploiting human beings. animals have moral agency. There's a great book. It's called When Elephants Weep. Ah, look at that kitty. I think she's making a statement. It's written by one of my favorite writers, Geoffrey Messiah Masson. And he says that animals experience intense emotions. You know, scientists don't like that. You go to a vivisection laboratory in Berkeley or San Francisco or anywhere in the country, it's forbidden to give animals names. Instead, you give animals numbers. Now, why do you think it's forbidden to give an animal a name? Probably because they don't want you to develop personal feelings for the animal. It's much easier to dehumanize the animal, treating it like a number. Isn't it amazing? That's exactly what the Nazis did to the Jews during World War II. We didn't have names. Instead, we had numbers. Put on our arms so that we wouldn't feel human. And so Masson says that animals can feel genuine emotions, real human emotions. You know, elephants will go visit the cemetery of their fellow elephants from time to time. Isn't it interesting how elephants are a lot like human beings? And he says that since animals have emotions and they can feel pain, then we have to treat them with the same kind of deference we would treat human beings. We should avoid injuring animals by killing them for food or imprisoning them for edification or experimenting on them to increase our knowledge. We should, as much as possible, allow them to live out their lives, exercising their full potential in the wild. You know, it's interesting. Jewish tradition says there's no mitzvah to eat meat. But if you eat meat, it has to be done in a kosher manner. And so, you know, it's interesting. Torah says that we should have pity on the mother bird and not take it with its young. Did I ever tell you the story when I was about 7 years old? I used to love climbing trees, like many other 7-year-olds. When you were 7 years old, Baruch, did you like climbing trees? Well, I remember climbing a tree and I saw a nest full of bluish eggs. And when I saw the eggs, you know what I said to myself? Eggs! I'll take them home and maybe my mother could make them for breakfast. So I was curious to see what was inside one of the eggs. You know what I discovered? Little baby chick, the little baby robin. And I felt like I was a murderer. I felt as though I destroyed something very, very precious, and there was nothing I could do about it. And I lived with that shame for so many years. But sometimes something bad like that can teach us valuable lessons that all creatures, great and small, have a right to live, and we have to learn how to respect life, not destroy it. God made Adam a caretaker. And when we take a look in the story of Noah, Noah is the preserver of the world. And right after the ark, what does God do with the world? He makes a covenant between man and the animals. And then we read later on in the Torah that regarding the Sabbath, we're not allowed to plow the earth, work the earth. We're not allowed to let our workers work on Shabbat, even our servants. Everyone gets a day off. According to Kabbalah, even in hell we get a day off on Shabbat. It's a great feeling. And so when you look throughout the Bible, it tells us that the world is not something inanimate. The world is alive, and we have a responsibility to look after it. It's a pity The professors I mentioned before at the beginning of my talk didn't have an inkling as to what the Bible really says about stewardship. Because if they did, they would have a profound respect for a tradition that is time-honored and ancient and still speaks to the issues of today. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Okay, let's turn now to page 166. These writings? Aleinu l'shavei Adon hakol, l'teiku d'lo yitzer b'reishit, shelo l'tzadik v'goyei haratzon, v'lo tzemanek mishpat adama, shelo tzalkaken Abraham v'golein k'cham olam, אנחנו קוראים משתחווים עובדים לבני מלך המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נותן שמיים וישמעאל ובנותן משכבות שמיים ומעלה ושמין התודות ושמין התודות וכל חיים ורחום ישמעו אלוהינו אלוהי everyone take every to Takato, Torato, Natayo, Natayo, but we both never have Mahaki Adonai, Uelohi, Namayin Dimah, Morning's Kaddish is on page 184. Anyone having yard site this week? Yeah, I have yard site for my son, Mendy. Yit Gadal, Yit Kadash, Shemei Rabbah, V'yamad Baruch Yutei, V'lim Lachutei, V'chayichon, V'meichon, V'chayichon, Beit Yisrael, V'agala, V'zmangori, V'yuramein, Yehish Shmei Rabbah, V'barach, V'lam L'mei Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'al v'yitramam v'yitnaseh v'yihadar v'yitalim v'talal shmei v'kudsha v'yirchu Le'elam mikol v'chata v'shirata v'shachata v'nehmata da'amir v'yamam v'romein Yehi shlom rabim yishmaya v'chayim aleinu v'akol Yisrael v'yimur amen v'oseh shalom v'imamah v'yaseh shalom aleinu kol Yisrael v'yimur amen. Okay, Arlene, do you have any announcements you want to make?
Well, I wanted to mention that it's also my mother's yard site.
And mine too.
Oh, okay. Good.
As far as announcements, there's a lot of things coming up in the next few weeks. On September 17th, we're going to see a movie in the social hall. That's the evening of Salichot. And we're going to see the jazz singer. And I believe it's the original jazz singer. So that should be fun. We'll get more information on that. And then something very special on September 18th. If you have a loved one who's buried at the Home of Peace Cemetery, and I know many of our congregants do, Rabbi will be at the cemetery to say prayers at the gravesite of your loved ones. You just need to make an appointment with them. They'll be there, about 10 to 1. So if there's someone you would like to have Rabbi say prayers for at the gravesite, please let him know. And soon you'll be getting information on the high holidays. We are having a wonderful community community meal during the first day of Rosh Hashanah. So there'll be a kosher catered meal, and it'll be right after the services, and we need your RSVP for that, and we'll be getting out more information on that as well. That's it. Thank you.
All right. Okay. We will not have class this week, but we will have a special program on Shabbat. Not this week, but next week we're going to go over some of the customs of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we'll do that after services, God willing. And that should be pretty good.
What date is that?
That will be next Sunday. When is next Sunday?
That should be the 18th.
18th? Good. That's right.
Yeah, the days are going by quickly.
Yeah, the time is flying, and it's astounding how amazing it is. We'll have the high holidays here, and we're going to have Liliana do the Kol Nidre. Hopefully Marco will be ready to read from Torah.
Yes.
You can practice afterwards if you like. And yeah, that's the main thing. So, any questions on anything? Okay, tell your friends, please get them to come for services for our Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. If we can get a few people, it will really make a big, big difference. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, Ye'er Adonai panav elecha v'chanecha, Yisra Adonai panav elecha v'yosem Shalom. God bless you and protect you. May lift his countenance into you, be gracious to you. May lift his presence towards you always, and grant you Shabbat Shalom. Thank you everyone who came, and we hope you enjoyed services.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom.